She hadn't even set her suitcase down when the man pressed a gun to Wyatt Callahan's chest. Wyatt didn't flinch, didn't blink. He just looked at the man the way a mountain looks at rain, unbothered, ancient, and absolutely certain of what it was. Then he said 4 words. Quiet, steady, final. Step away from her. The man stepped away. That was the moment Clara Whitmore understood she hadn't married a monster. She had married the only thing standing between her and one. So, if this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The stagecoach rolled into Black Hollow on a Tuesday, and nobody paid it much attention at first. Tuesdays in Black Hollow were slow. The saloon opened late. The sheriff spent most of the morning nursing coffee outside his office, squinting at the road like he expected trouble to announce itself in advance. The merchants swept their stoops without looking up. The women collected their laundry from the lines and kept their eyes down. That was what Black Hollow did. It kept its eyes down. Because in a town where Wyatt Callahan owned the biggest ranch, the deepest water rights, and the longest memory, keeping your eyes down was how a man stayed out of trouble. But Clara Whitmore didn't know any of that yet. She stepped off that stagecoach with a small leather suitcase, a folded piece of paper pressed into her coat pocket, and 24 years of a life that had already broken her in ways she hadn't fully named yet. She stood in the middle of that dusty street and looked around with the particular kind of stillness that belongs to people who have already survived the worst thing they could imagine and are simply waiting to see what comes next. She wasn't afraid. That surprised people later when they told the story. They expected her to be trembling, wide-eyed, clutching her skirts. But Clara Whitmore had buried her mother in February, her father in April, and her last real hope of a normal life somewhere in between. By the time she stepped off a stagecoach in Wyoming to marry a man she had never met, fear was a luxury she simply could not afford. The stagecoach driver climbed down from his seat and handed her the smallest of her bags. I was a weathered man, face like cracked leather eyes that had seen too many roads, and he hadn't said much during the 3-day journey from Cheyenne. But now, standing in Black Hollow with the morning sun behind him, he paused. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "You know who you're going to." It wasn't a question. "Wyatt Callahan," Clara said. "He's a rancher. He placed the advertisement through a broker in Chicago." The driver looked down at his hands, then back at her. "He's more than a rancher, miss." "I know," she said. "They told me he had a reputation." "It's not just a reputation." He glanced down the main street, then lowered his voice, as if the buildings themselves might be listening. "That man has ended fights before they started. He's walked into rooms where 5 armed men were waiting and walked out alone. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't have to. When Wyatt Callahan looks at a man a certain way, that man remembers every wrong thing he's ever done." Clara considered this. And you're a young woman from Chicago walking into that man's house." "I'm a woman who has no other options," Clara said simply. "If he wanted to harm someone, he wouldn't have placed a marriage advertisement. He'd have just taken what he wanted." The driver stared at her. Something shifted behind his eyes, not quite respect, but the beginning of it. He picked up her suitcase and set it down beside her feet. "Just be careful, miss, that's all." "I'm always careful," she said. She picked up her suitcase and walked toward the only building that matched the address on her paper, a general store on the east end of the main street where Wyatt Callahan had arranged for them to meet. She had walked about half the length of the street when she first felt it. Silence. Not the ordinary quiet of a slow Tuesday morning. Something different. The kind of silence that falls when every person in a space simultaneously holds their breath. Clara stopped. She turned her head slowly, the way her mother had taught her. Never show alarm. Never show weakness. Weakness, turn, like you own the direction you're turning. 3 men were standing outside the saloon across the street. One of them was very tall with a red beard and hands that looked like they'd been made for breaking things. He was staring at her in a way that made the back of her neck go cold. "Well now," Redbeard said. His voice carried easily across the empty street. "What do we have here? Somebody order themselves a mail-order bride." His two companions laughed. It was the kind of laugh that wasn't about humor at all. Clara kept walking. "Hey!" His voice sharpened. "I'm talking to you, sweetheart." She heard the boots on the wooden sidewalk, heavy, deliberate, coming toward her. Clara Whitmore did not run. She had made a decision somewhere on that long stagecoach ride that she would not spend the rest of her life running. She stopped. She turned. And she looked at the man coming toward her with the same calm expression she had worn when she signed that marriage contract in Chicago, when she gave away almost everything she owned, when she stepped onto a stagecoach toward a life she didn't know. "I'm looking for the general store on Elm," she said. "If you don't know where it is, I'll find it myself." Redbeard stopped about 6 feet away. His smile widened, and it was not a kind smile. "Oh, you don't need the general store, sweetheart. I can help you with whatever you need." "You can't help me," Clara said. "Step aside, please." The man's smile vanished. He took one more step toward her. And then something happened. A sound, or rather the absence of sound. The kind of silence that falls directly before a lightning strike. The saloon doors stopped creaking. The distant hammering from the blacksmith went quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Redbeard heard it too, because he stopped moving. Slowly, he turned his head. And that was when Clara saw Wyatt Callahan for the first time. He had come from somewhere behind her, from the direction of the general store. She realized later, because he had been waiting there when all of this started. He was standing perhaps 10 feet away, and he was not moving. He wasn't reaching for the gun at his hip. He wasn't raising his voice. He wasn't doing anything that could be called a threat. He was simply standing there, looking at Redbeard. And Redbeard, a man who probably outweighed Wyatt by 40 pounds and had two companions beside him, had stopped moving entirely. Wyatt Callahan was not what Clara expected. She had built a picture in her mind over the past 6 weeks since she signed that contract. Broad and brutish, perhaps with a scarred face and cold eyes, and the kind of roughness that comes from years of violence. She had expected a man who looked dangerous. What she found was a man who simply was dangerous, in the way that deep water is dangerous not by looking threatening, but by making you suddenly aware of your own smallness. He was lean and weathered, probably 10 years older than her. He had a face that had clearly taken its share of hard weather and harder years' lines at the corners of his eyes. A jaw that could have been cut from the same rock as the mountains behind the town. His hat was pushed back slightly on his head. His hands were relaxed at his sides. He wasn't looking at Clara. He was looking at Redbeard. He hadn't said a word. He didn't need to. Redbeard cleared his throat, looked down, shuffled his boots against the dirt. "We were just, go inside," Wyatt said. 2 words. Quiet as a door closing. Redbeard went inside. His companions were already gone. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the blacksmith started hammering again. The saloon doors creaked. The world resumed itself. Wyatt turned to look at Clara. For a moment, they simply regarded each other. The woman from Chicago, who had come with a contract and a suitcase, and the man who had sent the advertisement and apparently cleared a street without raising his voice. Then Wyatt said, "You must be Miss Whitmore." "Clara," she said, "and you must be Mr. Callahan." "Wyatt?" He looked at her for another moment, and whatever he was reading in her face, she had no idea, but something settled in his expression. He reached down and took her suitcase from her hand before she could protest. "You're safe now. Nobody touches you while you're under my name." He said it the way other men might say the sky is blue or the river runs north, as if it were simply a fact of geography. Not a promise, not a performance, just a statement of how things were. Clara had been given many things in her life. Comfort, then poverty, then grief. She had been given a dead mother and a dead father and an empty house and a contract signed by a stranger's hand. She had never once been given a guarantee. She picked up her second bag and followed him. The ranch was 2 miles outside of town, and they made the ride in the back of a wagon driven by a young ranch hand named Eli, who nodded once at Clara and then spent the rest of the trip staring very carefully at the road ahead of him. Clara sat across from Wyatt and watched the land open up around them. Big sky, dry grass. The mountains cut like torn paper against the horizon. Wyatt did not speak for a long time. He sat with his arms resting on his knees watching the road, and Clara had the sense that silence was his natural environment. He inhabited it the way most people inhabited conversation. She decided that if he wasn't going to talk, she was. "How long have you been in Black Hollow?" she asked. 8 years. "And before that?" A pause. "The war." "Which side?" He glanced at her. Something moved in his eyes. Not offense, but perhaps surprise. Most people, she imagined, did not ask him direct questions. "Union," he said. "My father served Union," she said. "He came back different." "Most men did." "He still talked about it," Clara said. "Every night for years. He said the only way to carry it was to say it out loud. He said men who kept it inside broke from the weight." Wyatt was quiet for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, "Your father was a wise man." "He was," Clara said. "He died in April." Wyatt looked at her again. This time the look held longer. "I'm sorry," he said. And unlike so many people who had said those same words to her over the past months, with their careful faces and their careful distance, Wyatt Callahan said it like he meant it, like he understood exactly what it cost. "Thank you," Clara said. They didn't speak again until the wagon pulled through the ranch gate. The first week was the strangest of Clara's life. She had come expecting rules, expectations, the particular kind of ownership that men in power tended to exercise over women who had no other choices. She had steeled herself for it, had rehearsed in her mind how she would be obedient, but not invisible, cooperative, but not erased. What she found instead was space. Wyatt showed her the house simply and practically: the kitchen, the storage, the room that would be hers with its window facing east so the morning light would come in first. He showed her where the water was, where the firewood was kept, where the pantry was stocked. He did not tell her how to use any of it. He did not tell her what time to wake up, or what to cook, or how to dress. He did not tell her anything really. On the third morning, she came downstairs to find coffee already made, sitting warm on the stove. There was no note. Wyatt was already outside working. She stood in the kitchen and looked at that coffee cup for a full minute before she understood what it was. It was not a grand gesture. It was not romance. It was consideration. The kind that does not announce itself. The kind that simply is quietly and consistently because the person doing it does not think it deserves fanfare. He had noticed she drank coffee in the mornings, so he made it. Clara sat down with her cup and thought about how long it had been since anyone had noticed something small about her and acted on it without being asked. She couldn't remember. On the 5th day, Eli mentioned in the careful roundabout way of a young man trying not to interfere that there were 2 shelves in the front room that had been empty since Wyatt moved in. "He said you might want to put things there," Eli said. "From your bags, books or whatever." "Did he tell you to tell me that?" Clara asked. Eli's ears went red. "He said it was a waste of good shelf space," he said, which was clearly not exactly what Wyatt had said. That evening, Clara unpacked her 3 books, the only things she had kept from her father's study, and set them on the shelves. She heard Wyatt come in from outside. She heard him walk past the front room. She heard him pause. She heard nothing more. He went to the kitchen and began making supper. But the next morning when she came downstairs, there was a new book on the table beside the coffee cup. Old with a worn spine. The Last of the Mohicans. No note. Clara picked it up, turned it over, set it back down. She smiled. It was the first time she had smiled in 3 months. It was during the 2nd week that she first understood why the town was afraid of him. She had gone to the general store for supplies alone because Wyatt had offered to come, and she had declined both because she wanted to learn the town and because she needed to understand if she was capable of moving through the world here without him beside her. She was at the counter waiting for Mr. Hensley, the shopkeeper, to measure out the flour she needed when she heard a conversation happening in the back aisle. 2 men, not trying to be quiet. "Still can't believe he sent for a woman. What does a man like Callahan want with a wife?" "Same thing any man wants with a wife." "You think she knows what she walked into?" What he's done. Clara kept her eyes on the counter. Heard he killed 3 men in Abilene, before he even came here. Heard it was 5. Heard it was justified. A pause. Doesn't matter if it was justified or not. You don't do something like that, and then just settle down. Men like that don't change. Clara turned around. Both men looked startled. They had not realized she was there, or perhaps had not realized she was the woman in question. She looked at each of them in turn. Men who talk about people behind their backs also never change, she said pleasantly. Yet here you are hoping they will. She picked up her basket and walked to the counter. Her hands were perfectly steady, but her mind was turning over what she'd heard, and for the first time since she arrived, something cold moved through her chest. Not fear of Wyatt exactly, but the first real recognition that she had married a man she did not yet know, and that the distance between who people said he was and who she was watching him be was very wide, and she had not yet decided which version was true. That evening she asked him. She was learning that Wyatt's silences were not walls, they were waiting rooms. He was a man who gave information when he thought it mattered, not when conversation demanded it. And she was learning to read the difference. But tonight, she needed something more than patience. She waited until supper was finished and the kitchen was quiet, and then she set down her fork and said, "Wyatt?" He looked up. "People in town say you've killed men." Not a question. "A statement offered like a trade here is what I heard here, is my willingness to hear your version." Wyatt was quiet for 3 seconds. 4. 5. "Yes," he said. "More than one." "Yes." "Were they trying to hurt you?" He held her gaze. "They were trying to hurt people who couldn't defend themselves." Clara absorbed that. "And you defended them." "I tried to talk first," he said. "I always try to talk first." He looked down at his plate. "Sometimes talking isn't enough." "The men in town say you're dangerous." "The men in town are right," Wyatt said. He said it without pride, without apology. The way a doctor might say that bone is broken as a simple fact assessed and named. "I am dangerous. I have always been dangerous. That part of me doesn't go away." "Then why did you send for a wife?" Clara asked. The question sat between them. Wyatt looked at her for a long moment. Long enough that she thought he might not answer. Long enough that the silence became its own kind of conversation. Then he said, "Because I'm tired of being the only dangerous thing in my own life." Clara didn't speak. "A man who has nothing to lose," Wyatt said slowly, like he was working through something he'd been carrying for a long time. "Fights one way, cold, without hesitation, without mercy, because nothing coming at him can take anything from him that matters." He paused. "I don't want to be that man anymore." "You want something to lose," Clara said quietly. "I want something to protect," he said. "There's a difference." She thought about that for a long time after she went to bed. The difference between having nothing to lose and having something to protect. She had never thought about those two things as separate until now. 19 days into her life at the Callahan Ranch. Clara saw a different side of the story. She had woken early before dawn because she was still not entirely sleeping through the nights in this new place, and gone to the kitchen to find coffee already waiting as always. But when she moved to the front window, she saw something that made her stop. A family was coming up the road. A man, a woman, and 2 small children. They were on foot, and they were moving slowly. The careful, exhausted movement of people who have been walking much longer than they should have been. She watched Wyatt come out of the barn before she even had time to consider what to do. He met them at the gate. She couldn't hear the conversation from the window, but she could see the shape of it. The man speaking in a low, urgent voice, gesturing back toward town, the woman holding the children close. Wyatt listening. Then he turned, walked back to the barn, and came out leading 2 horses. He said something to Eli, who disappeared inside the house. Eli came back with a cloth bag that looked like it held food. Wyatt handed the horses to the family. Handed them, as in gave them, as in the reins passed from his hand to theirs, and he stepped back. He said something, and the woman covered her mouth with one hand. The man shook Wyatt's hand, and Wyatt gripped it back with both of his. 10 minutes after they'd arrived, the family rode away. Wyatt walked back toward the barn. He never told her about it. Not that morning, not that week. As far as Wyatt Callahan was concerned, it apparently hadn't happened, or more precisely, it had happened, and it was not interesting, because it was simply what you did when a family showed up at your gate in need. Clara went back to the kitchen and poured her coffee. She sat down and thought about the men in the general store who said things like, "Men like that don't change." She thought about the stagecoach driver who warned her she was going somewhere dangerous. She thought about the way the entire population of Black Hollow lowered their eyes when Wyatt's name came up, as if looking away was the only safe response to something that big. And she thought about a man who woke before dawn to make coffee for his new wife and quietly gave away 2 horses to a family he barely knew and never mentioned either one. She was beginning to understand something about this town, about this man. They feared Wyatt Callahan, but they had never once stopped to ask what he was afraid of. She asked him on a cold Friday evening when the wind was coming down from the mountains and the fire was burning low and neither of them had spoken in 20 minutes. "What are you afraid of?" He looked up from the boot he was mending. She watched him carefully. She had noticed that Wyatt had 2 responses to unexpected questions, the kind that came from the world outside, like gunfire or a man with bad intentions. He answered immediately with total stillness and total readiness. But the kind that came from inside, from the territory of feelings, he did not map easily. Those took longer. He set the boot down. "Becoming something I can't come back from," he said. "What does that mean?" "There are men," Wyatt said carefully, "who start out with reasons for what they do. Good reasons, defending themselves, defending others, protecting something that matters." He paused. And somewhere along the road, the reasons stopped being enough. The thing they were protecting is gone or changed, and all that's left is the part of them that knows how to fight. And they can't stop. And they can't stop, he agreed. And they stopped trying. Clara looked at him. "You're afraid of becoming one of those men." He looked at the fire. "I think about it," he said. "More than I should, probably. You gave away 2 horses this morning." He looked at her. She could see the precise moment he realized she'd seen it. "That family needed them," he said. "Yes," Clara said. "They did." She held his gaze. "That's not a man who stopped trying." Wyatt was quiet for a long time. Then in a voice so low she almost missed it, "Not yet." It was the most honest thing she had ever heard anyone say. She reached across the table and without overthinking it placed her hand over his. He looked down at their hands. He didn't pull away. Outside, the wind moved through the valley and the fire crackled and settled, and the ranch sat quiet in the dark Wyoming night, holding its breath like the whole town did when his name came up, but for a completely different reason. Not fear. Something new. Something neither of them had a name for yet. Something that felt carefully and quietly like the beginning of safety. It was on the 26th day that everything changed. Clara had ridden into town alone. She had been doing so twice a week now because Wyatt had not once suggested she shouldn't, and she had taken that as the kind of permission that costs nothing to give and means everything. She had her errands, she had her growing knowledge of the streets and the people, and she had started to understand the particular social architecture of Black Hollow, who talked to whom, who avoided whom, where the power ran beneath the surface like an underground river. She was coming out of the post office when she heard it. "You're Callahan's wife." She turned. The man was standing against the wall of the building beside the post office. He was well dressed for Black Hollow, too well dressed, the kind of clothes that announce money in a place where most people announce practicality. Broad in the shoulders, a smile that was entirely constructed. "I am," Clara said, "Grant Holloway." He offered her nothing, not a hand to shake, not a nod, just his name dropped in front of her like a coin to see if she would pick it up. "I own the Holloway land east of your husband's spread. Half the cattle in this county carry my brand." "That's impressive," Clara said neutrally. "Your husband and I have some old business between us," Holloway said. "Nothing a woman needs to trouble herself with." I don't trouble easily, Clara said. He smiled. And this time it almost reached his eyes, which was somehow worse than when it hadn't. No, I don't imagine you do. A woman who marries Wyatt Callahan sight unseen has some nerve to her. He paused. I wonder if she understands what she's stepped into. I wonder if you always talk to women like they're guests at a party they weren't invited to, Clara said. Or if that's something you save for special occasions. His smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes shifted something sharper, colder. The kind of look that takes careful note of a person and files them away. Enjoy your afternoon, Mrs. Callahan, he said. He walked away, and Clara stood very still and watched him go. She did not go straight back to the ranch. She went to the general store and found Mr. Hensley, who, now that she had made it clear she was not to be spoken about in back aisles, had become something of an inadvertent ally. He was a nervous man, but an honest one, and he knew every seam of Black Hollow's social fabric. Grant Holloway, she said. Tell me about him. Hensley looked at her, then looked at the door, then back at her. Mrs. Callahan, I'm not asking you to get involved in anything, she said. I'm asking you to tell me what you know, the kind of thing people say when they think they're only talking to each other. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I wants your husband's land, has for years. The water rights, specifically the Western Creek, runs through Callahan land, and Holloway's cattle need that water come August. He paused. He's tried buying it twice. Wyatt said no both times. Third time, Holloway stopped asking. What did he start doing instead? Hensley picked up a cloth and began wiping down the counter. Last spring, 3 of Wyatt's hands quit inside 2 weeks. Said they'd had better offers. Only 2 of them actually went to work anywhere. He kept wiping. Holloway's operation. Clara absorbed this. He took Wyatt's men. He took 2. Scared off the other one near as anybody could figure. He paused. Before you came, a few months before, one of Wyatt's fence lines was cut. Cattle strayed. Cost him near 40 head before they were rounded up. Was there evidence? There was never evidence, Hensley said. There's never evidence with Holloway. That's the thing about him. He's careful. He set down the cloth. He's been waiting for Wyatt to do something that gives him grounds. Waiting for Wyatt to come at him, so Holloway can go to the law with a righteous face. But Wyatt never has. No, Hensley said, because Wyatt knows. He met her eyes. He knows exactly what Holloway is waiting for. Clara drove back to the ranch with the reins in her hands and the conversation turning in her mind piece by piece, the way her father had taught her to work through a problem, not rushing toward the conclusion, but following each thread to see where it led. Grant Holloway had been trying to break Wyatt Callahan for years. He'd tried money, he'd tried attrition, he'd tried provocation. None of it had worked. And now Wyatt had sent for a wife. A woman from Chicago, with no connections in Wyoming. No resources, no history, no protection beyond her husband's name. Clara understood in the cold, clear way of someone who has already survived the worst and knows how predators work what she was. She was the new angle. She was the thing Holloway hadn't tried yet. She pulled the wagon through the gate and found Wyatt waiting by the barn. He helped her down without a word, and she stood in front of him and looked at his face, that worn, careful face that had already in less than a month become something she recognized the way you recognize a landmark on a road you've started to know. I met Grant Holloway today, she said. Something went very still in Wyatt's expression. Not alarm, nothing in Wyatt's face was ever quite alarm, but a stillness that meant he was paying complete attention. Where? Outside the post office. He introduced himself. Very charming, very careful. She paused. He said you had old business between you. We do. He's been trying to get your land for years. Wyatt looked at her for a moment. You got all that in one conversation with Holloway. I got some of it. Mr. Hensley helped with the rest. She met his eyes. I need to know Wyatt. All of it. Not the version you'd tell someone you're trying to protect. The real version. He was quiet. I'm not a woman who came out here to be kept safe inside a fence, she said. I came out here because I had nothing left, and you offered me something, and I took it. And I am going to be a real partner to you, or I am going to be a complication you didn't account for. Those are the two options. She held his gaze. Which would you prefer? The stillness in him stretched for a long moment. Then, something shifted. Something deep and structural, like a door that has been braced against the wind, finally being opened from the inside. "Come inside," Wyatt said. He told her everything. He told her about the water rights and the fence lines and the men who'd been scared off. He told her about the 2 attempts at purchase, and what Holloway had said the second time. The answer was no. A man who won't sell is a man who hasn't found his price yet. He told her about the soldier he'd been and the land he'd come to Wyoming to find. He told her about the early years when Holloway had been merely an irritant, then a problem, then something darker. He told her about a man named Dylan, who had worked Wyatt's ranch for 3 years and whom Holloway had lured away with money and then sent back not to work but to start a fight. The fight Holloway had been counting on Wyatt to finish with his fists or his gun. The fight that would have given Holloway's allied judges in the county something to work with. "What happened?" Clara asked. "I walked away," Wyatt said. "Let Dylan swing at me 3 times and walked away." Clara stared at him. 3 times. "He was drunk and scared and doing what he was paid to do," Wyatt said. "I wasn't going to be what Holloway needed me to be." "And Dylan?" "Left town the next day. Holloway doesn't have much use for a man who failed the one job he was given." Clara sat with that. "How long have you been doing this walking away?" 2 years, Wyatt said. "Give or take." "That must be—" She stopped. "Exhausting," he said with the thin edge of something that might have been dark humor. "I was going to say lonely," she said. He was quiet. "Walking away from every fight alone," she said. "Nobody understanding why you didn't just—" "Nobody knowing there was a reason," he said. "Yes." Clara looked at him across the table. At this man who had spent 2 years absorbing blows and swallowing responses and being called a killer by the same town whose families he fed when they needed it, whose wounded strangers he helped on the road, whose children he made sure had enough when the winters were bad. A man everyone called dangerous. A man who had been practicing quietly and without applause the discipline of choosing not to be. "He'll come at us through me," Clara said. "I know." "He saw me as weakness." "I know," Wyatt said again. "Are you?" she asked. He looked up. "Is he right?" She held his gaze. "Am I making you weaker?" Wyatt looked at her for a long time. Long enough that the fire settled and the shadows shifted, and somewhere outside a horse moved in the dark. "No," he said. "But I am something he didn't count on." "Yes." "Then let's make sure," Clara said, "that he figures that out before he does something we can't undo." Wyatt was quiet for 3 seconds. Then for the first time since she had arrived in Black Hollow, she saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not relief exactly. Not gratitude. Something quieter and deeper and harder to name. The expression of a man who has been carrying something enormous for so long that he has forgotten what it feels like to put it down, and who is just beginning to realize he doesn't have to carry it alone anymore. "All right," he said. "All right," Clara agreed. Outside, the Wyoming wind moved through the dark, and the stars over Black Hollow were very bright and very cold, and in the ranch house on the west side of the county, 2 people who had arrived at this table from entirely different kinds of wreckage sat across from each other and began slowly to figure out what it meant to stand together. It was the most dangerous thing either of them had ever done, and neither of them flinched. The morning after their conversation, Wyatt was gone before she woke up. Not gone in the way that would have alarmed her a month ago. Not disappeared. Not vanished into whatever darkness she had once imagined surrounded him. His coffee was made. His boots were missing from beside the door. He was simply out working the way he was every morning before the sun fully committed to rising, because a ranch didn't wait for feelings to settle or conversations to be processed. But something was different. When Clara came down to the kitchen, she found a folded piece of paper on the table beside her cup. She picked it up. It said in handwriting that was careful and deliberate, the handwriting of a man who had not written much for a long time and was taking care. "Eli knows where I am if you need anything. Don't go into town alone today. not a command. The way he had written it, it landed less like an order and more like something said by a person who is afraid and doesn't want you to see them afraid. Clara read it twice. Then she poured her coffee, sat down, and thought about Grant Holloway's smile. She had met men like Holloway before, not in Wyoming, not with guns and land disputes, but in Chicago in drawing rooms and business offices where her father had sometimes taken her when she was young. Men who wore their power like a well-tailored coat, who understood instinctively that the most efficient way to break someone was not to attack them directly, but to find what they loved and lean on that instead. Her father had a word for men like Holloway. He called them architects, not builders' architects. They designed the collapse from a distance and let other people carry out the demolition. And Wyatt, for 2 years, had been refusing to be the demolition crew. She folded the note and put it in her pocket and went to find Eli. Howe was in the barn doing something complicated with a harness that clearly wasn't going well because he had the expression of a young man losing an argument with an inanimate object. "Where is he?" Clara asked. Eli looked up. "North fence. There was another cut last night." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Another cut. Clara kept her face still. "How bad?" "Lost maybe 20 head overnight. They're out rounding them up now." Eli paused, clearly wrestling with how much to say. "This is the 3rd time in 6 weeks, Mrs. Callahan." "3rd time," Clara repeated. "Yes, ma'am." She stood quietly for a moment. 3 fence cuttings in 6 weeks. Not random vandalism. Not opportunism. A sustained, deliberate campaign designed to bleed the ranch without ever providing proof of intent. Holloway's fingerprints everywhere and nowhere. "Does Wyatt think it's Holloway's men?" Eli looked at the harness. "Wyatt doesn't say what he thinks out loud much. But you think it." A long pause. "Everybody thinks it," Eli said quietly. "Nobody can prove it." Clara nodded. "Thank you, Eli." She went back inside and stood in the kitchen for exactly 2 minutes thinking. Then she sat down at the small desk in the corner of the front room where Wyatt kept his papers, the land records, the cattle tallies, the accounts. She had noticed it that first week and left it alone because it was his territory, and she was still learning the shape of this life. She didn't leave it alone now. She wasn't looking to intrude. She was looking for patterns. 3 fence cuttings. The 2 men who'd been poached from the ranch. The 1 man who'd been frightened off. The failed provocation through Dylan. And before all of that, 2 rejected purchase offers and the line Holloway had delivered on the second rejection, "A man who won't sell is a man who hasn't found his price yet." Clara found the land record. She spread it on the desk and looked at the property boundary and the creek and the way the water rights were written into the original deed. She was still looking at it when Wyatt came back. She heard him come in the particular sound of his boots, the way he always paused at the door to knock the dust off before entering, which was one of those small habitual courtesies that she had noticed and filed away in the growing catalog of things that told her who he actually was. She heard the sound of water being poured, the brief silence of a man drinking. Then he appeared in the doorway of the front room. He looked at her and the desk with his papers around her. He didn't say anything. "3rd fence in 6 weeks, Clara said. She didn't look up from the land record. 20 head lost overnight, and Holloway's men are never anywhere near the property when it happens. A pause. "Eli talks too much," Wyatt said, but without any real heat in it. "Eli talks the right amount," Clara said. "Sit down." He did. Which still slightly surprised her that a man who commanded rooms by standing still in them would simply sit down when she asked. She was beginning to understand that this was not weakness. It was something more deliberate. Wyatt Callahan chose who he listened to very carefully, and having decided to listen to her, he listened completely. "The water rights," she said. "The creek access. That's what this is really about. Always has been." "The fence cuttings aren't about your cattle," she said. "They're about your labor. He's trying to make the ranch too expensive to run. Too many losses, not enough hands, too much time spent fixing what he keeps breaking. He wants you too stretched to resist when he comes with a new offer." Wyatt was quiet. "He's going to come with a new offer," Clara said. Yes. When? I don't know. Soon. Wyatt's voice was even, but there was something underneath it, not anger exactly, but the particular exhaustion of a man who has been bracing against the same pressure for so long that his muscles have forgotten what it feels like to relax. He's been escalating. The cuttings are closer together. He's impatient. He got impatient, Wyatt said when I got married. The words sat between them and Clara understood what he meant without having to ask. Holloway had been playing a long game, confident that eventually, without anyone beside him, without any reason to stay, without anyone who needed protecting Wyatt would either make a mistake or simply leave. And then Clara had arrived, and the calculus had changed in ways Holloway hadn't accounted for yet. He thinks I'm your weakness, Clara said. He thinks you change what I'm willing to do, Wyatt said carefully. What I'm willing to risk. Does it? He looked at her directly. Yes, he said. But not the way he thinks. Explain that. Wyatt leaned forward, his arms on his knees, looking at the floor for a moment before looking back up at her. A man with nothing to lose, he said, and she recognized the phrase from their earlier conversation. Has no reason to be careful. He can afford to be reckless because there's no cost. Holloway thinks having you here makes me afraid to act, that I'll hesitate, that I'll hold back. And instead, Wyatt said, I have a reason to finish this. Not just survive it. Finish it. Make it so it can't be done again. He paused. That's different. Clara looked at him. You've been surviving it for 2 years. Yes. And now? Something shifted in his face. Hard to name. Harder to look away from. Now I want to win. The word dropped into the room and stayed there. Clara picked up the land record and folded it carefully. Then tell me everything you know about how Holloway operates. Not what he's done to you. How he works. Who does his thinking? Who delivers his messages? Who carries out the fence work without leaving evidence? Wyatt was quiet for a moment. Then he started talking. They sat there for 2 hours. By the time they were done, the afternoon light had shifted, and Eli had knocked twice on the door to ask about supper and been told to wait. Clara had 3 pages of notes in her careful handwriting, and something close to a plan, and the distinct sense that Grant Holloway had made a serious error the day he smiled at her outside the post office. He had looked at her and seen a pressure point. He should have looked more carefully, because what he had actually done by threatening the life she was building here, this slow, unlikely, astonishing life with coffee made before dawn, and books left on tables, and a man who walked away from fights because he understood what winning actually cost was, make it personal. And Clara Whitmore, who had survived poverty and grief, and 3 days in a stagecoach toward a life she didn't know, had never once in her 24 years on this earth walked away from something that was personal. She pressed her pen to the final page of notes and said without looking up, He has a man named Carson who coordinates the fence work. You said he drinks at the saloon on Wednesday nights. Most Wednesdays, Wyatt said. I'm going to talk to him. The silence that followed was the loudest she'd heard from Wyatt yet. Clara. I'm not going to threaten him, she said patiently. I'm going to find out who else he talks to. What Holloway has promised him. Whether he's the kind of man who gets nervous when things escalate. She put down her pen and looked at Wyatt. People talk to me. They don't expect it, and then they do it. It's the most useful thing about me. Wyatt looked at her for a long time. You're not what I expected, he finally said. You keep almost saying that and then stopping yourself, Clara observed. You can just say it. You're not what I expected, he said again, more directly this time. And there was something in his voice that was different from anything she had heard from him before, something that did not quite have a name yet, but sat in the air between them like heat. What did you expect? She asked. Someone who needed protecting, he said honestly. I do need protecting, Clara said. That doesn't mean I can't also be useful. He looked at her. No, he said. It doesn't. She picked up the land record again. Good. Now explain to me how the water rights work in practice during August. I need to understand what Holloway loses if he never gets access. And Wyatt, the most dangerous man in Black Hollow. The man everyone feared, and nobody understood, started explaining water rights to his wife, with the careful, focused attention of a man who has finally stopped being alone in the middle of his own problem. It was, Clara thought, the best conversation she had ever had. She didn't say that out loud, but she thought it very clearly. The Wednesday night visit to the saloon didn't go the way she planned, because the best plans never survived. Contact with the actual complicated nature of people, which was something Clara's father had also told her, and which she had never found a way to argue with. She had thought she would be unobtrusive. She had thought she would find Carson, position herself nearby, and let the natural sociability of a room full of people who like to talk do the rest. What she had not counted on was that everyone in that saloon knew who she was. The moment she walked through the door alone, because Wyatt's presence would have changed every variable. The room did not exactly go silent, but it adjusted. The volume dropped a register. Heads turned with the particular careful non-subtlety of people trying to watch without being seen watching. She went to the bar and ordered coffee, because she didn't drink whiskey, and she wasn't going to pretend otherwise, and the bartender, a compact man named Dutch, with a face that suggested he had heard and forgotten more secrets than most people ever accumulated, gave her coffee without blinking and said, "Evening, Mrs. Callahan." "Good evening," she said. "Lively tonight." "Wednesday usually is," Dutch said. She leaned against the bar and let the room settle back to something resembling normal around her, the way you wait for water to stop moving after you've disturbed it. She was good at that, at going still and becoming part of the furniture. Her mother had taught her that too. You want to know what people are really like? Clara, just stop demanding their attention. They'll forget you're there and show you everything. It took about 10 minutes. Carson was not hard to find. Wyatt had described him middle-height, sandy hair going gray, a habit of touching the brim of his hat when he was thinking. He was at a table near the back with two other men she didn't recognize, and he had the look of someone who was 3 drinks in and comfortable and not planning on going anywhere soon. She was not going to approach him directly. That wasn't the plan. The plan was the man sitting 2 stools down from her at the bar, who she had recognized the moment she came in. Tom Greer, who ran a small supply operation out of the eastern end of town, and who had been one of the people who turned helpful after she'd shut down the back aisle conversation in Hensley's store. Tom was a talker. Tom knew everything. And Tom, unlike almost everyone else in Black Hollow, was genuinely not afraid of Wyatt Callahan, not because he was brave, but because Wyatt had helped his family through 2 hard winters, and Tom had the kind of decency that remembered that. She moved 2 stools down. "Mr. Greer," she said. He turned and his face lit up with the uncomplicated pleasure of a man who likes people and isn't ashamed of it. "Mrs. Callahan didn't expect to see you in here." "I needed coffee and company," she said. "The ranch is quiet in the evenings." "That it would be," Tom said. "Your husband's not much for nights out." "No," Clara agreed. "He's a man who values a certain kind of quiet." "That's one way to put it," Tom said cheerfully, and then caught himself as if suddenly worried that was rude. "I mean no disrespect." "None taken," Clara said. "I'm still learning him." Tom relaxed. "He's a good man," he said with the quiet firmness of someone saying something they've decided about and do not intend to revise. People in this town don't always see that because they see the other part first. But he's a good man. "He is," Clara said simply. They talked for a few minutes about nothing in particular. The supply situation for the coming winter, whether the pass would close early this year, the general commerce of a small frontier town. Clara let the conversation breathe. Let Tom lead it where it naturally went, which is what good talkers do when given enough space. And Tom, being Tom, eventually got around to the thing that was clearly sitting on the surface of everyone's mind. "Heard there was another fence cut out at Callahan land," he said, lowering his voice slightly, but not as much as he might have in a different conversation. Clara said. "Third time," Tom said. "People are starting to notice the pattern." "Are they?" Clara said. "The ones who pay attention." He paused. "The ones who've got enough distance from the whole business to think straight." He glanced toward the back of the room toward Carson's table, though he didn't point or indicate with anything more than the direction of his eyes. The ones doing the work maybe haven't thought too hard about what happens when Wyatt Callahan actually decides he's done being patient. Clara turned her coffee cup slowly in her hands. What do you think happens then? Tom was quiet for a moment. I think Holloway's been counting on Wyatt to react the old way, he said. The way he used to, quick and hard and alone. He paused again. But that was before. Before what? Tom looked at her. Before you, he said simply. She held his gaze. People see things, Mrs. Callahan, Tom said. Small things. The way a man carries himself different when he's got someone to come home to. Wyatt's been, he searched for the word, settled. In a way he wasn't before. And settled men don't react. They plan. That should concern Holloway, Clara said. It should, Tom agreed. He took a long drink. I don't think it has, yet. Clara nodded once. Then she shifted the conversation easily, naturally, the way you change direction in a river by moving with the current instead of against it, and asked Tom about Carson. Not directly, not his name, but about the kind of men who did contracted work for large ranch operations in the county. The arrangement of it. Whether those men typically understood the full scope of what they were involved in, or whether they thought of themselves simply as hired hands following instructions. Tom, who was perceptive in the way that talkative people often are, having heard enough stories to recognize the shape of one, understood exactly what she was actually asking. He thought about it seriously. Depends on the man, he said. Some of them know everything. Some of them know what they need to know and nothing else. Keeps them useful and keeps them insulated. If something goes wrong, they can say honestly they didn't know. He paused. The ones who don't know everything are the ones who get scared when the stakes change. When what they thought was a low-risk arrangement starts looking like something more serious. Because they didn't sign up for serious, Clara said. They signed up for fence work, Tom said, and something in his voice made it clear he knew he was not talking generally anymore. Clara finished her coffee, stood, set the cup down on the bar, and reached for her coat. Thank you for the company, Mr. Greer, she said. Always a pleasure, Tom said. She was pulling on her coat when she heard from the table near the back the particular quiet that falls when someone in a room realizes they've become the subject of the conversation happening near them. She turned her head just slightly. Carson was looking at her. Not the way Redbeard had looked at her on the street her first day, not with that particular blunt aggression. Something more complicated. Something that looked around the edges like the beginning of unease. Clara looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Not long enough to be a confrontation. Long enough to make sure he understood that she had been there, and that she knew he had been there, and that she was not afraid of that knowledge. Then she walked out. She rode back to the ranch through the cold Wyoming night, and when she came through the door, Wyatt was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee waiting. He looked at her. She sat down across from him. Carson's nervous, she said. He doesn't know yet what he's nervous about, but the instinct is there. He's a man who wanted a simple job and is starting to understand it's not simple. Wyatt was very still. Tom Greer is sympathetic, she continued. And Tom Greer talks to everyone, which means everything Tom believes about you. Everyone in this town will believe eventually, because Tom is not the kind of person people distrust. She folded her hands on the table. We need people to understand that you're not going to break. That what Holloway is doing isn't working. Because right now, he's counting on everyone in this town believing you're one wrong move away from giving him what he wants. What are you suggesting? Wyatt asked. I'm suggesting, Clara said, that we stop being invisible. She met his eyes. You've been quiet for 2 years, absorbing, waiting. That's made you unreadable. Holloway doesn't know what you're going to do, so he keeps pushing until he gets a reaction. But unreadable also means the town doesn't know what to believe about you. She paused. Let them see you. Not the version they're afraid of. The version I see every morning when I come downstairs. Wyatt looked at her for a long time. You want me to what? Attend church. Despite everything, Clara almost smiled. That wouldn't hurt. But I'm thinking more the Morrison family. They're struggling. You know it and I know it because Eli mentioned it twice, and you went quiet both times in the way you go quiet when you're already thinking about a problem. They had a bad crop year, Wyatt said. They're going to have a worse winter if nobody helps them, Clara said. Go help them, openly. Not the way you gave those horses away before dawn where nobody could see. Openly where the town can form an opinion about what it means. Wyatt's jaw tightened slightly. Not resistance exactly. More like discomfort with visibility. I know, Clara said quietly. You don't do things to be seen. You do them because they need doing. I understand that about you. She leaned forward slightly. But Holloway has been defining you for 2 years in this town because you won't define yourself. So let me rephrase. Go help the Morrisons, because they need it. And if people happen to see, let them. He was quiet for a long time. You know, he said finally, I sent for someone to run a household. I know, Clara said. You're running considerably more than that. Yes, she said. Is that a problem? Another long pause. And then, quiet, unexpected, and completely genuine. Wyatt Callahan almost smiled. It didn't fully reach the surface, but it was there underneath, unmistakable, the way heat is unmistakable even through a wall. No, he said. It's not. They went to the Morrison farm on Saturday. Wyatt brought 2 of his hands and enough supplies to see the family through the first part of winter. He brought it in broad daylight on the main road in a wagon that anyone passing by could see. He stayed for 3 hours, helped repair a section of the barn roof that had been worrying Jim Morrison since September. And when he left, Mary Morrison held Clara's hands in both of hers and said with the directness of a woman who has spent too long being careful, You're good for him, you know, whatever people say. What do people say? Clara asked. Mary Morrison looked at her steadily. They say he's dangerous. He is, Clara said. He's also the man who just fixed your roof. Mary was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. He is. Word traveled, because word in a small town always travels, and Tom Greer, who had apparently been within eyeshot of the main road on Saturday afternoon, helped it travel faster than it might have otherwise. By Tuesday, 3 separate people had said something to Clara in town that indicated they knew about the Morrisons, and what they said was not what she had expected. They said that was a decent thing. Simple. Without elaboration. The way people say things in a frontier town where decency is not cheap. She was coming out of the post office when she heard the boots behind her. She turned. It was not Redbeard this time. It was not Carson. It was a man she hadn't seen before, young, with a face that hadn't settled into its permanent expression, yet wearing clothes that were a grade too new for his apparent circumstances. He was holding a folded envelope. Mrs. Callahan, he said. He held out the envelope. From Mr. Holloway. Clara looked at the envelope, then at the young man. His hand was very slightly unsteady. He was not a threat. He was a messenger chosen specifically because he was young and unthreatening, which told her something precise about Holloway's thinking. He wanted her to take this without alarm, without escalation. He wanted to reach her before she could think too clearly. She took the envelope. Thank you, she said pleasantly. The young man left with visible relief. Clara stood on the sidewalk outside the post office and held the envelope for a moment. Then she put it in her coat pocket without opening it, finished her errands, drove back to the ranch, and set it on the kitchen table in front of Wyatt. He looked at it, then at her. You didn't open it, he said. It's addressed to the ranch, she said. It concerns both of us. He picked it up and opened it. She watched his face as he read it. It told her more than the letter did, probably. The way the stillness in him went deeper. The way something behind his eyes sharpened into a particular kind of focus she hadn't seen before. He set the letter on the table and turned it so she could read it. It was written in the careful, formal language of a man who had lawyers available and knew how to use them. It offered to purchase the Callahan ranch land water rights and existing cattle at a price that was, Clara estimated, approximately 60% of actual market value. It cited the ranch's recent operational difficulties. The phrase operational difficulties landing precisely on the fence cuttings that Holloway's own men had made as justification for the reduced offer. It gave 30 days to respond. And then at the bottom in language so smooth. It almost hid what it was. A suggestion that failure to accept would result in Holloway pursuing certain legal claims regarding disputed boundary lines on the western edge of the property, which would require litigation that could take years to resolve, and during which the water rights would be in question. A threat wrapped in a business letter. Clara read it twice. Then she looked up at Wyatt. His face was entirely controlled. But she had lived in this house for nearly a month, and she could read him now in ways that would not have been visible 30 days ago. She could see the tightness at the corners of his jaw, the particular set of his shoulders. "He's escalating," she said. "Yes. He's bringing lawyers into it now. That means he's nervous. Something changed." She paused. Tom Greer's conversations reached him. The Morrison visit reached him. He knows the town is shifting. She looked at the letter again. He expected you to react before this. He expected you to come at him. And you didn't. And now he's been watching you build something here for a month, and it's making him move faster than he planned. Wyatt's eyes were on the letter. He thinks the lawsuit threat will do what the fence cuttings didn't. He thinks you'll do the math and decide litigation isn't worth it, Clara said. Years of uncertainty, legal costs, the water rights in question. He thinks you'll take 60 cents on the dollar just to make it stop. A silence. He doesn't know you, Clara said quietly. Wyatt's jaw worked. He's known me for 8 years. He's watched you for 8 years, Clara said. That's different. He's watched a man absorbing damage and not retaliating, and he's read that as a man who can be worn down. He's never understood the actual reason. She leaned forward slightly. Wyatt, the boundary line dispute, is there any validity to it? There's a survey discrepancy, Wyatt said slowly. Old one, from before my time. The original survey markers don't perfectly match the deed language. It's never mattered because neither side ever pushed it. Until now. Until now. Who did the original survey? County surveyor, man named Aldrich. He's been dead for 15 years. Who has his records? Wyatt was quiet for a moment. Something was changing in his expression, not quite the same look as when he'd said, "I want to win," but related to it. The look of a man whose mind is beginning to move in a new direction. The county land office, he said, in Cheyenne. Can you get to them? I can write for them. Then write, Clara said. Tonight. Because if there's a discrepancy in those records, and Holloway knows about it, it means he's had someone looking at the county archives, which means there may be other things in those archives worth knowing. She paused. And I want to know them before he does anything with them. Wyatt stared at her. What? She said. You did this in Chicago, he said. What you're doing now. This kind of thinking. My father was a businessman, she said. Before the debts and the sickness. I watched him for 15 years. I learned to read a room before I learned to read a book. She met his eyes. I'm not doing anything remarkable. I'm doing what needs to be done. Clara, he said. She stopped. He said her name differently than he usually did. Up until now, it had been almost formal Clara as a marker, a way of directing address. This time it was something else. It was the way people say a name when the name has started to mean more than a word. What, she said more quietly than before. Thank you, he said. She looked at him for a moment. Write the letter to Cheyenne, she said. And don't thank me yet. Holloway has 30 days, and he's not the kind of man to wait 30 days. No, Wyatt agreed. He's not. He was right. They had 12 days before everything changed. On the 9th day, Carson came to the ranch, not with tools or with trouble, alone on horseback in broad daylight, which was itself so unexpected that Eli came to find Clara before he even came to find Wyatt. Clara came to the window and looked out at the man on the horse and understood immediately what she was seeing. A man who had thought about the conversation in the saloon for 9 days. A man who had made a decision. Don't let Wyatt go out there alone, she said to Eli. She went out herself. Carson was maybe 40 up close. He had a weathered face and hands that were used to physical work, and eyes that were doing the particular thing eyes do when a person is afraid but has committed to the action anyway. He looked at Clara when she came out, and something in his face shifted. Not surprise exactly, but the adjustment of a man recalibrating. "Mrs. Callahan," he said. "Mr. Carson," she said. Wyatt came out behind her. Clara felt him come to stand at her left shoulder, felt the shift in the quality of the air that happened when Wyatt Callahan's attention focused on something. Carson looked at Wyatt, looked at Clara, looked at his hands. "I've been doing work for Holloway," he said. 3 years. Nobody spoke. "The fence work," Carson said. "I want you to know he told me it was a boundary dispute, that the land was genuinely contested, that he was owed access." He stopped, swallowed. "I found out last week that was a lie. He had a lawyer look at the actual deed. He knew it was Callahan land. He knew from the beginning." Clara held very still. "I won't do it anymore," Carson said. "And I'll say so, in front of whoever needs to hear it." The silence stretched. Wyatt said, "You know what happens if Holloway finds out you came here?" "Yes, sir," Carson said. "I do." "And you came anyway." Carson looked at him. "My father was a sharecropper," he said. "He spent his whole life being told land was contested that wasn't, being pushed off things that were rightfully his." He paused. "I didn't realize what I was doing until I was already doing it. I'm not—" He stopped, started again. "I'm not the man I thought I was. I'd like to try to be." Another silence. Then Wyatt said, "Get down off the horse. Eli will see to it." Carson climbed down. He came inside. And over the next 2 hours in the kitchen of the Callahan Ranch, with coffee on the table and the afternoon light coming through the eastern window, Carson told them everything. The instructions, the methods, the timeline. The names of the 2 men who'd been paid to poach Wyatt's hands. The exact nature of the boundary survey Holloway had quietly commissioned and what it had found. And one more thing. One thing that neither Wyatt nor Clara had known. Holloway hadn't just been watching Wyatt for 8 years. He had documents, old ones, from the Civil War period. Records that Holloway claimed showed Wyatt Callahan had deserted his regiment during a critical engagement, records that, if presented to the right people in the right way, could potentially be used to challenge Wyatt's land title, since it had been granted in part as a veteran's claim. Clara went very still when she heard this. She looked at Wyatt. His face had gone to a different kind of stillness than she had ever seen on him. Not the controlled stillness of a man managing his reaction. Something that went deeper. Something that looked around the edges like pain. "Did you?" she asked, quietly, without accusation. Just the question. Wyatt looked at the table. "There was a family," he said. "On the road. During the retreat from," he stopped. "It doesn't matter where. A family on the road. A woman and 2 children. There were men, not enemy soldiers. Raiders. Using the confusion of the retreat to do what raiders do." He paused. "I stopped them." "And missed the engagement," Clara said. "I rejoined my unit the next day," Wyatt said. "My commanding officer knew what had happened. He said it was his call to make, and he called it a delay, not a desertion. He's been dead for 6 years. So there's no one to confirm it?" "No. But Holloway has the official record, which only shows you weren't where you were supposed to be." "Yes." Clara breathed slowly. This was the pressure point Holloway had been saving. Not the fence lines. Not the lawsuit. This. The thing that could take everything. She looked at Carson. "Does Holloway know you know about the documents?" "No," Carson said. "I overheard it. I don't think he knows." Clara looked at Wyatt. He was looking at her. "We need to get ahead of this," she said, "before he uses it." "How do you get ahead of something like that?" Wyatt said. His voice was controlled, but she could hear what was underneath it. 8 years of surviving, and this old buried thing might be the thing that finally worked. "You tell the story first," Clara said. "You tell it publicly, completely, and you let people decide what it means. Because right now, Holloway has one version of that story, and you have another, and the only way to make sure the true version wins is to make sure people have already heard it before he opens his mouth." Wyatt stared at her. "You want me to talk about the war," he said, "in public." "I want you to talk about who you are," Clara said. "Which happens to involve the war, yes. The longest silence yet. Then Wyatt said to Carson, "Thank you for coming here." Carson nodded. Then Wyatt said to Clara, in a voice that was so quiet, it was almost only breath, "I don't know how to do that." "I know," she said. "I'll help you." He looked at her, and in his face she saw something she had not expected to see from this man in this kitchen on this cold Wyoming afternoon. He looked afraid, not of Holloway, not of the documents, not of what the town might say or what the law might do. He looked afraid of being known, of being seen completely all the way down to the parts that still hurt by people who had only ever seen his strength. Clara reached across the table and put her hand over his, the same way she had done by the fire when he said not yet. "You protected a woman and 2 children," she said. "And it cost you. And you never told anyone because you didn't think it needed telling." She held his gaze. "Wyatt, the people in this town need to hear that story. Not because it proves you're a good man, but because they already know you're dangerous, and they need to understand what you're dangerous for." His hand turned under hers, slowly, and held on. Outside, the wind moved through the valley. Somewhere in a well-appointed office in the eastern part of the county, Grant Holloway was 30 days into a plan he believed was working. He had no idea that the man he'd been trying to break for 8 years had just stopped surviving and started fighting back. And that he wasn't fighting alone anymore. The night before Wyatt told his story, he didn't sleep. Clara knew because she didn't sleep either, and at some point past midnight, she heard him move through the house, not restless, not pacing, just moving the way a man moves when the inside of his head is too loud to stay still. She heard the front door open. She heard the particular sound of boots on the porch boards. She heard him sit down in the chair outside that creaked once under his weight and then went quiet. She gave him an hour. Then she put on her coat and went outside and sat in the other chair and didn't say anything because she had learned that Wyatt Callahan did not need prompting. He needed someone willing to stay in the silence with him until he was ready to leave it. The stars were very bright and very cold, and the valley was so quiet she could hear the horses breathing in the barn. After a while, Wyatt said, "His name was Thomas." She waited. The boy on the road, the woman's son. He was maybe 7 years old. He was holding his sister's hand so tight she was crying, but she wasn't making any sound because he'd told her not to. Wyatt's voice was even and careful, the voice of a man recounting something he has carried so long it has worn smooth from handling. When it was over, when I dealt with the men who were there, he looked at me and he said, "Thank you, sir. 7 years old, standing in the road in the middle of a war. Thank you, sir." Clara didn't speak. "I've never told anyone that," Wyatt said. "The whole story." "Why not?" A long pause. "Because the moment I tell it, it becomes something I did to be praised for. And that's not—" He stopped. "It was just what needed doing. I was there. I did it. That should be the end of it." "It is the end of it," Clara said, "until Holloway makes it the beginning of something else." Wyatt was quiet. "You telling the story doesn't change what it was," she said. "It just means Holloway doesn't get to be the one who tells it first." She looked at the stars. "A lie told without competition becomes the truth. Your father ever tell you that?" "My father didn't say much," Wyatt said. "Mine said it constantly," Clara said. "Usually about business, but it applies everywhere." She turned to look at him. "Tomorrow, Wyatt, we go to town. You talk to the people you trust, Hensley, Tom Greer, the Morrisons. You let them hear it from you. Not a speech, not a confession. Just the truth the way you told me just now." He looked at her sidelong. "The way I told you just now, I didn't even get through the whole thing." "Then tell me the rest," she said. "Practice." Another silence. Then slowly, haltingly at first, and then with more ease, he told her the rest. All of it. The regiment, the retreat, the road, the men he'd stopped. The walk back to his unit the next morning with blood on his coat, and nobody to explain it to, except his commanding officer, who had looked at him for a long time, and then said, "I'm going to write this as a delay, son. Because that's what it was. Don't make me regret it." The years since carrying it, not as shame exactly, but as a thing too complicated to explain, so he simply hadn't explained it. And the awful knowledge that the one man who could confirm all of it had been dead for 6 years. When he finished, Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How many men?" "4. 4 men," she said. "Alone, on a road in the middle of a war." I had the element of surprise. "Wyatt." He stopped. "4 men," she said again. "A woman, a boy, a girl. You could have kept walking. Your orders were clear. Nobody would have known." "I would have known," he said immediately. "Yes," Clara said. "You would have." She stood up from the chair. "That's the story. That exact sentence. Tell it exactly like that tomorrow." She went back inside. And for the first time that night, she heard Wyatt settle in his chair and go still, the particular stillness of a man who has set something down and found the surface beneath him solid enough to hold. In the morning, they went to town. It did not happen in one place or one conversation, because that would have felt like a performance, and Wyatt Callahan performing anything was so foreign to his nature that it would have destroyed the effect entirely. It happened the way real things happen, in pieces in different rooms between people who trusted each other enough to speak honestly. Tom Greer heard it over the counter at the supply store. Hensley heard it in the back of his shop while Clara made sure the front door stayed open, so any passerby who happened to slow down would catch the shape of the story without feeling manipulated into listening. Jim Morrison heard it at the ranch on Thursday when he came to return the tools Wyatt had lent him for the barn roof. And Jim Morrison, who was a man of few words, but great gravity in the community, shook Wyatt's hand afterward and said, "I knew there was more to it, always did." The story moved through Black Hollow, the way all true stories move through small towns quietly from person to person, gathering weight as it went. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real, and people who live hard lives recognize reality on contact. Clara watched it happen and said nothing to accelerate it. You don't push a river. On Friday, 3 days after Carson had sat in their kitchen and changed everything, the letter from the county land office in Cheyenne arrived. Wyatt brought it in from the post and set it on the table, and they both looked at it for a moment before he opened it. Inside was a surveyor's report, the original Aldrich survey, copied from the county archives, along with a note from the records clerk explaining that a second party had also requested copies of the same documents approximately 3 weeks prior. Holloway had already seen them, and the records showed something Wyatt hadn't known. The survey discrepancy was real, but it ran in Wyatt's favor. The original markers, properly interpreted, placed the boundary line 40 feet further east than Holloway had been claiming. Not in dispute. Clearly, Callahan land. And more critically, the original survey explicitly notated the creek access as an appurtenant right attached to the Callahan deed in perpetuity. Holloway had seen these records. He knew the survey favored Wyatt, and he had threatened a lawsuit over it anyway. Clara read the letter twice. Then she looked up at Wyatt. "He was bluffing," she said. Wyatt's expression was unreadable. The lawsuit threat, he knew it wouldn't hold. He was counting on you not requesting the original records, counting on you to be intimidated enough to settle before anyone looked too closely. She set the letter down. "He showed his hand. He showed his hand." Wyatt agreed. His voice was very quiet. "Because he's running out of moves." "Which makes him more dangerous," Clara said. "Not less." The words barely finished leaving her mouth when they heard horses outside. Not one horse, several. Moving fast and then stopping hard, the way horses stop when the person riding them wants a rival to make a statement. Wyatt was on his feet before Clara finished turning toward the door. He moved her behind him with one hand, not roughly, not dismissively, but with the quick, absolute precision of a man whose instincts had been trained over years of understanding where threat comes from and where people need to be when it arrives. She let him because this was not the moment to argue about it. She moved behind his left shoulder instead of fully behind him so she could see. Eli's voice came from outside, high and tight. "Mr. Callahan." Wyatt opened the door. There were 6 men in the yard. 4 of them she had never seen, hired clearly by the look of them, the particular anonymous quality of men paid to show up and be numerous. The fifth was a man she recognized from the saloon the first night, one of Carson's former companions. And in front of all of them on a gray horse was Grant Holloway. He looked different than he had outside the post office. The careful, constructed smile was gone. In its place was something more direct and considerably less pleasant. "Callahan," he said. "Holloway," Wyatt said. He stepped out onto the porch. "You want to get off my property?" "I want to discuss your answer to my offer," Holloway said. "Your 30 days are almost up." "My answer is no," Wyatt said. "I gave you that answer 8 years ago. Nothing's changed." Holloway's jaw tightened. "A lot has changed. I have documents." "I've seen your documents," Wyatt said. "I've also seen the Aldrich survey. The original. All of it." A pause. "Have you?" Something flickered behind Holloway's eyes. The first crack in the surface. He recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. "The war record explains itself," Wyatt said. "I was delayed. My commanding officer confirmed it. He's dead, which I understand is convenient for you, but the people in this town have heard the story now, and they'll decide for themselves what it means." He stepped down off the porch into the yard, and Clara watched the 6 men on horseback do something involuntary and telling. They shifted. Slightly collectively. The way men shift when something they weren't fully prepared for enters the space. "You've been cutting my fences for 6 weeks. I have a witness to that. You've been running a land dispute you knew you couldn't win in court. I have the survey records to prove it. And you've come to my home with armed men to pressure me into a sale you have no legal right to compel." Holloway stared at him. "You have no witness that will stand up." "Carson's standing up," Wyatt said flatly. "Right now, today. He's talking to the county sheriff in Cheyenne. Tom Greer drove him out there this morning." The silence that followed was complete. Clara watched Holloway's face. She had thought she'd seen him recalibrate once before outside the post office. That had been minor. This was something else entirely. This was a man looking at a structure he'd spent years building and realizing in real time that someone had been removing the foundation stones while he was focused on the top floors. "You planned this," Holloway said. Quieter now. The bluster flattening into something harder. "My wife planned most of it," Wyatt said. "Simple, direct, without any of the false modesty that would have made it a performance. Just the truth." Holloway looked at Clara. She met his gaze from Wyatt's left shoulder and did not look away. "You're making an enemy," Holloway said to her. "You were already an enemy," she said. "We're just making sure everyone knows it." Holloway looked back at Wyatt. And Clara saw him make a decision, saw it in the way his expression closed down, went flat. Went to that place where men go when they've decided that if they can't win the way they planned, they'll try to win by destroying what matters instead. "You've gone soft, Callahan," he said. "Marriage changed you. You used to be someone worth being afraid of." Wyatt stepped forward. Just one step. And Clara felt the quality of the air change, felt the men on the horses feel. It felt even Holloway's gray horse feel it, shifting its weight and tossing its head. Wyatt's voice came out level and cold and perfectly clear. "No. Marriage gave me something worth fighting for." He let that sit. Then, "I'm only dangerous if you hurt my bride." The words went through the yard like something physical. Clara felt the exact moment they landed, felt the shift in every person present, even the hired men who didn't know the full story of who they were standing in front of. Because there are words that work differently than other words. Words that don't just communicate, they establish. They draw a line in the ground, and everyone present understands on some fundamental level exactly what it means to cross it. Holloway understood. She could see it in his face. The architectural intelligence that made him dangerous at a distance had enough honesty in it to recognize when a calculation had failed. He had spent 8 years trying to find the thing that would break Wyatt Callahan. He had tried isolation, attrition provocation, legal threat, and public humiliation. None of it had worked, and now the man standing in front of him was not the cold, solitary, nothing-to-lose figure that those strategies had been designed to defeat. He was a husband, standing in front of his house, protecting his family. with evidence, a witness, and a town that was slowly, irreversibly changing its mind about what his name meant. Holloway picked up his reins. "This isn't finished," he said. "No," Wyatt agreed. "It's not. But it's going to finish in a courtroom, not in my yard, with lawyers and records and a witness who'll say clearly what he saw." He met Holloway's eyes. "You don't want that. I know you don't. Because a man who wins by making things complicated in the dark doesn't do well when everything's laid out in the light." Holloway looked at him for a long, hard moment. Then he turned his horse and rode out of the yard, and his men followed, and the gate closed behind the last of them, and the sound of hooves faded down the road toward town. Clara let out a breath she hadn't fully realized she'd been holding. Eli made a sound something between a laugh and a gasp from somewhere near the barn. Wyatt stood in the yard and watched the road for a moment after the horses were gone. Then he turned around. Clara was right there. He looked at her. Really looked at her, the way he had started to look at her in recent days. The way that meant he was seeing all of it, not just the surface. The coat she'd put on in a hurry. The steadiness of her hands. The fact that she had moved to his left shoulder instead of behind him because she needed to see. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "You?" I was quiet for a moment. Then, "I've been saying that man's name in my head for 8 years, he said. "Every time something went wrong. Every fence, every man he scared off every night, I spent trying to figure out what came next." He paused. It was different, saying it out loud, in front of him. "Different how?" He looked at the gate. "Smaller," he said. "He got smaller." Clara nodded. "That's what happens when you stop letting someone exist only in your own head." He looked back at her. "You knew that would happen." "I hoped it would," she said honestly. He reached out and with a deliberateness that was entirely unlike. Impulse pushed a strand of hair back from her face where the wind had blown it. His hand stayed at the side of her face for just a moment. "Thank you," he said, for the second time. But this time, it didn't sound like gratitude for a service rendered. It sounded like something that didn't have a cleaner name yet. Something that was still becoming. "Don't thank me," Clara said, her voice not quite steady. "It's not finished." "No," he agreed, his hand dropped. "It's not." They were right about that. Because Holloway, riding back toward town with 6 hired men, and a plan in ruins behind him, was not a man who accepted losing quietly. He was an architect, and architects who can't build tend to burn. The fire started at the western fence line at 2 in the morning. Clara woke to Eli pounding on the door, and when she came downstairs, Wyatt was already pulling his boots on, already moving with that total focused readiness that she had come to recognize as the deepest version of who he was. Not the man who made coffee before dawn or left books on tables, but the version underneath all of that, the one that had survived a war and 8 years of Grant Holloway and everything else. The world had tried, the one that knew exactly what to do when the world stopped being careful and started being dangerous. "How bad?" Wyatt said to Eli. "It's moving toward the north pasture," Eli said. "If it reaches the hay stores." "Get the hands up," Wyatt said. "All of them, now." He was out the door. Clara was 3 seconds behind him. He turned when he heard her. "Clara, I'm not staying in the house," she said. "Tell me what to do." He looked at her for exactly 1 second. Then, "The water pump at the north end needs 2 people to run at full capacity. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Eli will show you. Don't get ahead of the fire line." He met her eyes. "Don't get ahead of it." "I understand." He turned and ran. She ran. The next 3 hours were the most physical of Clara Whitmore's life. She had grown up in a city. She had never fought a fire. She had never done any of the things she did in those 3 hours, working the pump with Eli, until her shoulders screamed, passing water to the line of men beating at the edges of the blaze, relaying instructions she barely understood between people moving too fast to explain themselves. She lost a boot in a mud patch. She burned her right hand lightly on an ember that came down on the pump handle. She did not stop. Wyatt was everywhere. That was the only way she could describe it later. He was at the fire line, and he was directing the hands. He was reading the direction of the wind and moving people before she understood why, and being right every time. He was what a man is when he has spent years building something and refuses absolutely to let it be taken. At 4:30 in the morning, the fire died. Not out fires that size don't simply stop, but controlled. Beaten back. The hands moved along the edges, making sure nothing reignited, and Eli sat down against the pump housing with his head in his hands from pure exhaustion, and Clara stood in the middle of the yard with a burned hand and one boot, and the absolute bone-deep certainty that she had never in her life been this tired. Wyatt came to her out of the dark. He looked at her hand immediately. The burn, not bad, but visible. He took it carefully in both of his and examined it without speaking, and the intimacy of that gesture, so straightforward and so focused, undid something in Clara that the 3 hours of fire and exhaustion and fear had not. "It's fine," she said. "It's minor." "It needs wrapping," he said. "Wyatt." She waited until he looked up from her hand to her face. "Was anyone hurt?" "No." "The livestock. Safe. We got the fence line before it reached the pasture." His hands tightened slightly around her. 20 feet more, and we'd have lost the hay. If we'd lost the hay. "We didn't," she said. He looked at her. In the dark, with the smell of smoke in the air, and both of them covered in soot and exhaustion, and the particular kind of aftermath that only comes from surviving something together. He looked at her, and the thing that had been becoming between them for weeks was suddenly and completely there, undeniable. "He did this," Wyatt said. "Yes," Clara said. "I can't prove it. Not tonight," she said. "But Carson's in Cheyenne. The survey records are filed. The story is out." She held his gaze. Every move Holloway makes now is visible. He's not operating in the dark anymore, and he knows it, and that's why he did this tonight. He's panicking. "Panicking men do unpredictable things," Wyatt said. "Yes," Clara said. "They do." A silence. "I need you to do something," she said. "And I need you to trust me." "Tell me," he said. "Tomorrow morning before Holloway can get ahead of this. I need you to ride to every neighboring ranch in this county and let them see this." She gestured at the burned fence line, the blackened ground, the evidence of what the night had been. "Let them see it, and let them draw their own conclusions. Because every rancher in this territory understands exactly what a fire at a neighbor's fence line at 2 in the morning means. And every one of them is going to look at their own land and think, if it happened to Callahan, it can happen to me." Wyatt was very still. "You want to build a coalition," he said. "Holloway's strength is isolation," Clara said. "He picks people off one at a time because nobody talks to each other. Nobody compares notes. Nobody realizes the same thing is being done to all of them in different forms." She paused. "You're not the only rancher he's leaned on for water access. Tom Greer told me about the Hendersons 2 months ago. And the family that sold out last spring sold under what they called pressure, though they never said from who." Wyatt's expression had gone very focused, very still. The way it went when he was understanding something completely. "He's been doing this for years," Wyatt said slowly. "Across the whole county. We're just the ones who didn't sell," Clara said. "Which makes us the most useful people in this county right now, because we're still standing, and we have evidence, and we have a witness." She looked at him steadily. "Ride tomorrow. Let them see what happened here, and let them decide if they want to stand together." Wyatt looked at her for a long moment. Long enough that the first gray light of dawn had begun to show at the edges of the sky by the time he spoke. "When I sent that advertisement," he said, "in Chicago, I wrote, I have a ranch. I need a capable woman who isn't afraid of hard work and hard country. Do you remember?" "I remember," Clara said. "I meant the ranch part," he said. "The work, the country." He paused. "I didn't know I was going to get this." "What did you get?" she asked quietly. He looked at her. Really looked all the way through, with none of the careful distance that had characterized the early weeks. "A partner," he said, "in the fullest sense of it." Clara held his gaze. "Wrap my hand," she said, "and then get some sleep. You have a long ride tomorrow." He almost smiled. Almost. The shadow of it moved across his face and was gone, but she had learned to see it. He wrapped her hand with the same careful deliberateness he applied to everything. And when he was done, he held it for just a moment longer than necessary, and neither of them spoke, and the dawn came up slow and cold, and full of everything that was still coming. Holloway had made his most desperate move, and the man he'd spent 8 years trying to break was for the first time not standing alone. Wyatt rode out at first light, and Clara watched him go from the porch with her wrapped hand and a cold cup of coffee, and the particular feeling of a person who has set something large in motion and must now wait to see where it lands. He was gone 3 days. She hadn't expected 3 days. She had thought 1, maybe 2 ride to the neighboring ranches, let them see, let them talk, come home. But on the second morning, Eli told her with the careful tone of a young man relaying information he wasn't entirely sure was welcome, that Wyatt had sent word through a passing rider. He was going further than the neighboring ranches. He was going all the way to the Henderson spread on the far eastern edge of the county. The family that had sold under pressure last spring. The ones Tom Greer had mentioned. Clara absorbed this. "Did he say anything else?" she asked. "He said don't worry," Eli reported. "Did he say it like a man who meant it, or like a man who says it because he thinks it's what you're supposed to say?" Eli thought about this with more seriousness than she expected. "Second one," he admitted. "Thank you, Eli," she said. That was honest. She went back inside and did not worry, because worrying without information was a waste of the kind of energy she could not afford to spend. Instead, she cleaned the house, finished the accounts. Wyatt had been avoiding, wrote 3 letters on his behalf regarding the county land office records, and had a long conversation with Tom Greer, who came by on the second afternoon with news from town. The news was not good. Holloway had been busy while Wyatt was riding. He had gone to the county sheriff, not the one in Cheyenne, but the local one, a man named Briggs, who Tom described with careful neutrality as someone who appreciated the importance of maintaining good relationships with the larger landowners in the area. Holloway had filed a formal complaint alleging that Wyatt Callahan had threatened him with physical harm during the confrontation in the yard 2 days prior. He had brought 2 of his hired men as witnesses. Clara set down her coffee cup very carefully. "Threatened him," she said. "That's what the filing says," Tom told her. "Briggs came by the saloon last night asking around, wanting to know if anyone else had heard about an altercation at the Callahan ranch." "There was an altercation?" Clara said precisely. "Holloway came to our property with 6 armed men to pressure my husband into an illegal sale. My husband asked him to leave. He left." "That's not what the filing describes." "No," Clara said. "I imagine it isn't." She thought for a moment. "Who did Briggs talk to?" "Mostly people who weren't there," Tom said, which I suspect was the point. Clara looked at him. "Were you there?" "No." "But you know what happened." "I know what you've told me," Tom said carefully. "And I know Wyatt Callahan. 20 years of knowing what kind of man he is counts for something." "It counts for a great deal," Clara said. "If you're willing to say so." Tom was quiet for a moment. This was the moment she had been working toward without fully realizing it. The moment where the goodwill she had been carefully, genuinely building translated into something concrete. She hadn't manufactured Tom Greer's affection for Wyatt. She hadn't manipulated it. She had simply made it visible, given it a place to go. "I'll talk to Briggs," Tom said. "Thank you," Clara said. "Don't thank me yet. Briggs is careful about who he believes." "I know," Clara said. "But you'll talk to him before Holloway gets another conversation in, and that matters." Tom left. Clara sat at the kitchen table with her notes and her letters, and the growing clear picture of a man, Holloway, who was doing exactly what she had predicted. Panicking. Striking out in multiple directions. Trying to create enough noise that the truth got buried under the volume of competing claims. It was, she thought, the move of a man who knew he was losing. Knowing you were losing and actually being willing to stop were 2 different things. On the 3rd morning, Wyatt came home. He came through the door with 3 days of road dust on him, and an expression she had not seen before. Not the controlled stillness, not the almost smile, not the focused readiness. Something in between all of those. Something that looked like a man who had gone out expecting one thing and found another entirely. Sit down, she said. I'll get coffee. Carson's in trouble, he said. He sat down. She stopped. What kind of trouble? Holloway's men found out he went to Cheyenne, Wyatt said. Somebody talked. I don't know who, someone at the county office, maybe someone who recognized him. Carson came back from Cheyenne, and 2 of Holloway's men were waiting at his place. He paused. They didn't hurt him, but they made it very clear what would happen if he showed up in any courthouse to testify to anything. Clara sat down across from him. Her mind was moving fast. Is he still willing to testify? He's scared, Wyatt said. He has a right to be. Is he willing? She pressed. Wyatt looked at her. He said he'd make up his mind when the time came, which means yes, probably if we can give him enough reason to believe it's safe. Then we need to make it safe, Clara said. I'm open to hearing how, Wyatt said, and there was a dry edge to it that was not quite humor, but was adjacent to it. The tone of a man who has enormous confidence in someone and is expressing it by declining to offer his own solution first. She had noticed that about him in recent weeks. The way he made space for her thinking without making it feel like he was standing back. He leaned in and listened the way some people leaned in to speak. The Henderson family, she said. What did you find? Something shifted in his face. More than I expected, he told her. The Hendersons had not simply sold under pressure. They had sold after a series of events that followed an almost identical pattern to what Callahan had been experiencing: fence damage, hands intimidated, and then a legal threat. But their legal threat had been different. Holloway had claimed a water diversion on the Henderson property was affecting downstream flow on Holloway land, causing agricultural damage. The claim was almost certainly fabricated, but the legal costs to fight it would have bankrupted the Henderson operation in under a year, so they sold. But James Henderson, who was 63 years old and had built that ranch from nothing and sold it at 60 cents on the dollar, with his hands shaking, had kept records. Every incident, every date, every name. 3 years of documentation kept in a tin box under the floorboards of his daughter's house in town, because he had known with the particular clarity of a man who has been made helpless that he might one day need to prove what had been done to him. Wyatt reached into his coat and laid a folded sheaf of papers on the table. Clara stared at it. She picked it up slowly, unfolded it, read. It was meticulous. Names, dates, amounts paid, instructions, given, incidents coordinated. It documented a pattern of behavior so consistent, so deliberate, and so widespread that it stopped being a property dispute and became something with a different name entirely. Fraud. Extortion. Criminal conspiracy across multiple properties in the county over a period of at least 5 years. Her hands were very steady. She set it down. She looked at Wyatt. James Henderson gave you this, she said. He didn't give it to me right away, Wyatt said. We talked for most of a day. He wanted to know. He paused as if deciding how much to say. He wanted to know if I was going to do something, or if I was just going to know about it and stay quiet. The way he'd stayed quiet. Because he'd stayed quiet, and that hadn't helped him, and he wasn't willing to hand over what he had to another person who was going to absorb it and disappear. Clara looked at the papers. What did you tell him? I told him about Carson, Wyatt said, and the survey, and the fire, and about you. He paused. I told him I wasn't doing this alone anymore, and that made it different. It is different, she said. I know. He looked at the papers on the table. He cried, Wyatt said quietly. When I told him we might actually be able to do something with it. He sat in his daughter's kitchen and he cried. This man who built a ranch from nothing. He cried. Clara was quiet. How wasn't weak? Wyatt said almost to himself. He was just alone. Same as I was. Same as all of them. That's what Holloway does. He makes sure nobody's talking to each other. So everyone thinks they're the only one. And now, Clara said, now there are 4 ranchers who've agreed to meet. Henderson, the Baylors from the North End, the Garcias who haven't sold but have been under the same kind of pressure for 2 years, and me. He looked at her. We're meeting here, Friday, if that's all right. Of course it's all right, Clara said. Friday, I'll make enough food to keep 4 ranchers talking through the whole afternoon. She paused. And then we're taking all of this Henderson's records, Carson's testimony, The survey the fire evidence to the county prosecutor in Cheyenne. Not the sheriff. Briggs is in Holloway's pocket and we both know it. The prosecutor. Wyatt nodded slowly. I know a man there. Good man. Honest. Then write to him tonight, Clara said. Before anything else happens. Because Holloway's filing complaints with Briggs and buying himself time. And every day we wait is a day he uses to shore up whatever walls he has left. Wyatt picked up the Henderson records and looked at them for a moment. This is enough, he said. This alone is enough to open a criminal investigation. It's enough, Clara agreed. Combined with Carson, it's more than enough. Carson's scared. Carson's scared and he still came to us, she said. That's not a man who's going to fold. He needs to know he's not alone either. Wyatt was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'll ride to Carson tomorrow. Bring him in. Bring him here, Clara said. Let him see the Henderson records. Let him understand what he's part of. Right now he's a scared man who did a brave thing and doesn't fully know why. Show him the picture. People are braver when they can see the whole picture. Wyatt looked at her with that particular look she had come to recognize. Not admiration, exactly, because admiration implied surprise, and he had stopped being surprised by her. It was something steadier than admiration. The look of a man who has come to depend on something so completely that it has become part of how he orients himself in the world. You're right, he said simply. I usually am, she said. Drink your coffee. He did. And for a few minutes, they sat across from each other in the kitchen of the ranch house that had started as a business arrangement and become in the space of less than 2 months, in the middle of a land war, through fence fires and late-night conversations, and early morning coffee, and books left on tables without explanation. Something else entirely. Neither of them named it. But both of them felt it in the specific way that you feel a thing when it has stopped being new and started being necessary. The Friday meeting lasted 4 hours. 4 ranchers, sitting around the kitchen table with Henderson's records spread in the center, talking in the direct, unembellished way of people who work with their hands and have no patience for anything that takes longer to say than it takes to think. The Baylors. Hank and his son Clem had their own stories. The Garcias had been dealing with a variant of the fence problem that they had attributed to weather damage until they heard the pattern described. Henderson sat quietly for most of it and said very little, and what he said carried more weight than anything else in the room because he was the proof of what they were all trying to avoid. Clara fed them and stayed at the edge of the conversation and listened. When the meeting was done and the ranchers had shaken hands and ridden out, Wyatt sat at the table in the silence and looked at his hands. I should have done this 2 years ago, he said. You didn't know 2 years ago what you know now, Clara said. I should have talked to people, asked questions, not just... He stopped. Not just survived, she said. Yes. You were alone, she said. It's very hard to build a coalition when you're alone. You need someone to start the conversations. She sat down across from him. You have someone now. He looked up. Yes, he said. I do. 3 days later, Carson sat at the same table and read the Henderson records straight through without speaking. When he finished, he put the papers down and looked at the wall for a moment. Then he looked at Wyatt. I want to testify, he said. I want to go on record, all of it. You know what that means? Wyatt said. I know what it means, Carson said. I'm 43 years old, and I've done things I'm not proud of, because the money was there, and I told myself it was complicated. It's not complicated. It's just wrong. He pushed the records back across the table. When do we go to Cheyenne? The letter to the county prosecutor had already been sent. The reply came on a Wednesday, quick, official, and precise. The prosecutor's name was Alderman, and he was, as Wyatt had said, an honest man. The letter requested a formal meeting with all parties' documentation and witness statements at the earliest opportunity. The earliest opportunity was 10 days away. On the 8th day, Holloway made his last move. Clara was alone at the ranch. Wyatt was at the north fence with Eli and 2 hands doing repair work close enough that she could have called out and been heard on a quiet day, but far enough that she couldn't see the main gate from where she was working in the front room. She heard the horse. 1 horse this time. No theater of numbers. Just one rider coming to the gate and stopping. She went to the door. Holloway was alone. That stopped her cold, because Holloway alone was a different calculation than Holloway with 6 men. Alone, he was either desperate or he had something so specific to say that he didn't want witnesses. Both possibilities were dangerous. She stepped out onto the porch. He looked at her for a moment. He had aged, she thought, in the past 2 weeks, not dramatically, but in the particular way that powerful men age when they realize they are not as powerful as they believed. Something in the set of his jaw. Something behind his eyes that had not been there the first day she met him. "Mrs. Callahan," he said, "is your husband here?" "He's on the property," she said. "I can get him." "I came to talk to you," Holloway said. Clara was very still. "Then talk." He looked at his hands on the reins. And what she saw then was something she had not expected. Not the architect, not the man with the constructed smile and the careful legal language. A man who had run out of architecture. A man at the bottom of a long fall looking up. "I know about the prosecutor," he said. "Alderman." "Then you know it's already in motion," she said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "I've done things," he said. "Things that I told myself were business. Strategy. He stopped. "Henderson," he said. "That family. I told myself they were weak. That the land would be better managed by someone who knew what they were doing. I told myself a lot of things." Clara looked at him and felt something complex move through her. Not sympathy exactly, but the particular recognition of a person who has also made survival justify itself to itself in smaller ways, in different circumstances, and knows what that looks like from the inside. "What do you want, Mr. Holloway?" she said. He met her eyes. "I want to know if there's a way through this that doesn't end in a criminal court." She was quiet. "Because I have a daughter," he said. "She's 12. Her mother died 3 years ago. He stopped again. "I'm all she has." His voice changed on those last 4 words. Barely, but enough. Clara took a long breath. "That's not a conversation for me to have," she said carefully. "That's a conversation for James Henderson and the Baylors and the Garcias. The people you hurt." She held his gaze. "And for my husband. Not for me." "Would he?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "Wyatt is not a vengeful man. He never has been. But the people whose land you took and whose lives you damaged, that's not mine to decide for them." Holloway looked at the ground. "No," he said quietly. "It's not." "I'll tell him you came," Clara said. "And what you said." He nodded. Slowly, like a man whose body has gotten heavy. He picked up his reins. "For what it's worth," he said, "I underestimated you when I saw you outside the post office." He paused. "I thought you were a vulnerability." "I know what you thought," Clara said. "I was wrong." "Yes," she said. "You were." He rode away. Clara stood on the porch and watched him go, and felt the particular complicated feeling of watching something powerful become small. Not satisfying the way she had imagined it might be back in the early days, when she was still building the picture of what Holloway was and what he had done. Smaller than satisfaction. Quieter. The feeling of a thing ending that had cost too many people too much. She was still standing there when she heard Wyatt's boots coming up from the north field. He saw her face before he reached the gate and stopped. "What happened?" She told him. He listened without speaking. All of it. The 1 horse. The conversation. The daughter. The question about whether there was a way through that didn't end in a criminal court. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think that's not for me to decide," she said. And I told him so. "But what do you think?" Wyatt said again, quietly. "Meaning, what do you believe not? What did you say, not what is the correct position?" Clara looked at her wrapped hand. The burn was healing. In another week it would be a scar. Small, pale, barely visible. The kind of mark that only means something to the person wearing it. "I think," she said slowly, "that justice and revenge are different things. And I think the people who were harmed get to decide which one they want." She paused. And I think a 12-year-old girl has nothing to do with what her father did. Wyatt absorbed this. Henderson should hear it, he said. What Holloway said. He should hear it and make his own decision. Yes, Clara said. I'll ride to him tomorrow. I know. He came through the gate and stood in front of her and looked at her with the full open attention that had become the way he looked at her when something mattered. You could have made him a promise, he said. Just now. Something vague. Something that would have made him feel better. Made him easier to deal with. I know, she said. You didn't. No. Why not? Clara looked at him. Because the people he hurt deserve to know the truth. All of it. Including that he came here today. Including that he's afraid. Including that he has a daughter he's worried about. She paused. They deserve to make real decisions with real information. Not decisions shaped by what I decided to tell them. Wyatt was quiet. That's who you are, he said. It wasn't a question. That's who I'm trying to be, she said. Same as you. Something moved through his face. The almost smile, but deeper. Reaching further than it usually did, he reached out and took her uninjured hand in his. Not briefly, not as punctuation. He held it. I rode out 3 days ago, he said, thinking I needed to find allies, people who would stand with me. You found them, Clara said. I found more than that, he said. He looked at their hands. I found out what it's like to not be the only person in the fight. He looked up. I've been the only person in every fight I've ever been in. My whole life. The war, this place, everything. He paused. I didn't know it was supposed to be different. Clara held his gaze. It's supposed to be different, she said softly. I know that now. He held her hand, and the afternoon light came through the window, the way it came every afternoon in this house that had started as a transaction, and become slowly, stubbornly, against every reasonable expectation, a home. And in 6 days, they would go to Cheyenne with Henderson's records, and Carson's testimony, and the survey, and the fire evidence and everything Holloway had done, laid out in plain language for an honest prosecutor. And whatever happened after that in the courtroom between the ranchers and the complicated question of a man with a daughter and a long list of wrongs. They would face it the same way they had faced everything since that first night in the kitchen when Clara had said, "Tell me all of it," and Wyatt had, together. Not because the contract said so. Not because they had no other choice. Because somewhere between the coffee made before dawn and the books left without explanation and the hand held in the dark. After a fire, the arrangement had become something that neither of them had words for yet, but both of them quietly and completely understood. They rode to Cheyenne on a Monday, all 6 of them. Wyatt and Clara Henderson and his son-in-law, Carson and Hank Baylor, who insisted on coming because, as he put it, he had been quiet long enough and his wife agreed with him, and that settled it. The prosecutor's office was on the 2nd floor of the county building, and Alderman was exactly what Wyatt had promised. A compact, direct man in his 50s, who read the Henderson records without speaking for 20 full minutes, while everyone in the room waited, and then looked up and said simply, "This is criminal conspiracy, across at least 5 properties. I'm opening a formal investigation today." Henderson let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for a year. Carson said nothing. But Clara watched his face and saw something move through it, the particular relief of a man who has done a hard thing and found out it was worth doing. Wyatt sat very still, the way he always sat when something significant was happening that he didn't yet know how to receive. Clara reached under the table and put her hand briefly on his. Just for a second. Just enough. He looked at her. She looked back. The investigation moved faster than any of them expected, because Alderman was the kind of prosecutor who understood that a case, this well documented, did not benefit from delay, and because Henderson's records were so meticulous that they functionally did half the investigator's work before anyone was even formally interviewed. Within 2 weeks, 3 of Holloway's hired men had been brought in for questioning. Within 3 weeks, 2 of them had given statements in exchange for reduced charges. The kind of calculation that men make when they realize the structure they've been working inside has already collapsed, and the only question is whether they go down with it. Carson testified on a Thursday morning in a plain room with a table and 3 officials and a court recorder. Clara had asked him the night before how he was feeling, and he had thought about it for a moment and said, "Like myself, for the first time in a while." She had told him that was exactly right, and he had nodded once and gone to bed. On the stand, or rather at the table, because these proceedings were not yet courtroom theater. He was steady and precise and thorough. He said what he had seen, what he had done, what he had been told. He said it without elaboration and without apology, and without the particular kind of hedging that comes from people who are still protecting themselves. He had decided to stop protecting himself, and the decision showed in every word. Afterward in the hallway, Wyatt shook his hand and Carson said, "It's strange." "What is?" Wyatt asked. "I feel lighter," Carson said. "I thought I'd feel worse. I thought carrying it was the heavy part. But it turns out, putting it down is easier," Wyatt said. Carson looked at him. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, that's it exactly." They rode back to Black Hollow the same afternoon, and by the time they arrived, the news had already moved through town, the way news moves in small places ahead of the people. It concerns arriving in pieces and fragments that everyone assembles into different shapes until the real version shows up to correct them. Tom Greer was at the gate when they rode through, which was not an accident. "Alderman opened the investigation," he asked before Wyatt had fully dismounted. "This morning," Wyatt said. Tom nodded. He looked at Clara. "Told you," he said. "You told me nothing," Clara said. "You helped with everything." Tom grinned. "Same thing," he said, and went back to town to continue the work he did best, which was talking to people in ways that made them feel they had arrived at conclusions on their own. The charges came down 6 weeks later. Holloway was indicted on 4 counts fraud, extortion, criminal conspiracy, and 1 count of arson related to the fire at the Callahan fence line, because one of the men who had given a statement had been present that night and described it in enough detail that the evidence became overwhelming. The arson charge was the one that landed hardest in the county. People could understand a land dispute. People could even understand the particular ruthlessness of a powerful man pushing a smaller one. But fire in the night on a rancher's property was something different. That was the kind of thing that everyone in ranching country could feel in their gut, because it could have been any of them. When the indictment was read publicly, the room was very quiet. Holloway sat at the table with his lawyer and said nothing and looked at the surface in front of him. He did not look at Wyatt. He did not look at Henderson. He looked at the table, and Clara, watching from the back of the room, thought of the 12-year-old girl who was not in this room, and what this day was going to mean for her, and felt the complicated mixture of things that she had felt since the afternoon Holloway came alone to the gate. She had told Wyatt about that conversation. Wyatt had ridden to Henderson the next morning, as he said he would. Henderson had sat with it for a long time. Then he had said, "I want him to face what he did. I want it on record, and I want it real. But I don't need him destroyed." He had paused. "I'm not that man." Wyatt had said, "No, you're not." Henderson had said, "Neither are you." Wyatt had been quiet for a moment. Then, "No, I'm not." The plea agreement came 2 weeks after the indictment. Holloway pled to 3 of the 4 counts. The arson charge was reduced in exchange for a full accounting. Every property, every tactic, every payment to every man over 5 years. The accounting was thorough. It was damning. And it was the thing that finally completely and publicly dismantled the version of events that Holloway had been constructing for years. Because when everything was laid out in plain language and official record, what it showed was not a shrewd businessman navigating aggressive competition. It showed a man who had spent 5 years systematically targeting smaller ranchers, isolating them, manufacturing legal threats he knew were baseless, and using the cost and complexity of fighting back as a weapon against people who didn't have the resources to withstand it. The Henderson family got their land back, or most of it. Not all. Some of the legal work was complicated, and some of it would take more time, but enough. Enough that James Henderson stood outside the county building on a Tuesday afternoon and looked at the sky for a long moment without speaking, and when his son-in-law asked if he was all right, he said, "I haven't felt all right in 18 months. I do now." And then he went to find Wyatt Callahan and shake his hand for the third time, and this time he said, "I wouldn't have done this without you coming to my door. I want you to know that," Wyatt said. "You kept the records for 3 years. You did that before I came to your door." Henderson looked at him. "I kept them because I thought maybe one day," he said. "But a man gets tired of waiting for maybe. Sometimes he needs someone to show up and make it more than that." Wyatt didn't have an answer for that, but he didn't need one. Clara heard about this conversation from Wyatt that evening, sitting at the kitchen table that had become the center of their life, in the way that kitchen tables do when a house has stopped being a building and become something people actually live inside. He told it simply the way he told most things, without editorial trusting the story to carry its own weight. When he finished, she looked at him. "You showed up at his door," she said. "Because I asked you to ride. Because you understood what needed doing," he said. "We both understood," she said. "That's different from one of us understanding." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yes, it is." She poured more coffee. Outside, the first real winter had settled over Black Hollow, and the ranch was quiet in the specific way that places are quiet when they are full of life and not threatened. It was a different quiet than the one that had lived here when she arrived. She understood that now, looking back. That earlier quiet had been the quiet of a man who had learned to take up as little space as possible because he had nobody to fill space with. A held breath quiet. The quiet of a life lived entirely inside itself. This quiet was different. This was the quiet of a fire burning well, and food enough, and a day that had asked everything of both of them and been answered. "Wyatt," she said. He looked up. "Do you remember the first thing you said to me when I stepped off the stagecoach?" He thought about it for a moment. "You're safe now," he said. "Nobody touches you while you're under my name." "Yes," she said. "I thought it was a promise about protection. Physical protection. I thought you were telling me you were strong enough to keep me out of harm's way." "That's what I meant," he said. "I know," she said. "But I've been thinking about it differently lately." She held his gaze. "Nobody touches you while you're under my name. It's not just protection, it's belonging. The kind that goes both ways." She paused. "I'm not just safe because you're strong. I'm safe because someone in this world has claimed me as worth protecting. And I have claimed you the same way. That's what changes everything." Wyatt was very still. "I came out here," Clara said, "with a contract and a suitcase and nothing left. And I thought I was making a practical decision. The best available option in a set of bad options." "And now," he said, quietly. She looked at him at the face she had been reading for months now, that had become as familiar to her as the sound of the ranch at night, as the smell of coffee before dawn, as the particular weight of his hand when he held hers. "Now I think," she said, "that the best decision I ever made was walking into that general store on Elm Street and deciding that whatever I found on the other side of it, I was going to meet it honestly." He reached across the table. She put her hand in his. "I need to tell you something," he said. And something in his voice made her still not alarmed, but attentive, the way you go attentive when you understand that what comes next is going to matter. "Tell me," she said. "I sent that advertisement," he said, "because I was tired of being alone. I told myself it was practical, that I needed someone to run the house, and I was offering a fair arrangement in return." He paused. "But there was more to it than that. There was a part of me that thought if I had someone that was real and present and mine to protect, I might finally be able to stop fighting just to survive and start fighting for something worth having." He looked at her. "I didn't know you'd be you." "Who did you think I'd be?" she asked softly. "Capable," he said. "Sensible. Willing to work. That's what I asked for." A pause. "I didn't know you'd walk into a room full of people who were afraid of me and decide on your own to understand me. I didn't know you'd sit across from Holloway and not flinch. I didn't know you'd stay up until midnight working a problem that wasn't yours to solve and call it partnership." His hand tightened on hers. "I didn't know someone like you existed." The fire crackled and settled. The ranch was quiet. Clara looked at this man, this dangerous, careful, honest, complicated man who had spent his whole life being the thing standing between people and harm, and who had never once asked anyone to stand between him and anything. And she understood completely what it had cost him to say what he just said. Not the words, the exposure, the willingness to be known that thoroughly by someone who would remember. "I exist," she said. "I'm right here." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he raised her hand and pressed his mouth to the back of it, to the scar from the burn that had faded to pale, and held it there for a moment that was not brief. When he looked up, his eyes were clear and steady and full of something that had no name yet but would. The winter settled over Black Hollow, and in the town that had once whispered Wyatt Callahan's name with fear, people began to tell a different story. They told it the way all true stories are told, in small places, slowly in pieces built from the things they had actually witnessed rather than the things they had assumed. They told it in the supply store, and at the well, and over fences between properties, and at the church on Sundays. They told it the way Tom Greer told it, which meant everyone eventually heard it, and the version they heard was the true one. They said that Wyatt Callahan had faced down Grant Holloway with evidence and witnesses, and a coalition of ranchers who had found each other because a woman from Chicago had understood that isolation was a weapon and chose to dismantle it. They said he had done it without firing a shot, without losing his temper, without becoming the thing everyone had always predicted he would become. They said he had stood in his own yard and told the most powerful man in the county that he was only dangerous if someone hurt his bride, and that it had turned out to be both absolutely true and a complete misunderstanding of where the real danger lay, because the danger was never the gun. It had never been the reputation, or the scars, or the cold look in the eyes of a man who had survived more than most people could name. The danger, the real deep enduring danger that Grant Holloway had never accounted for, was a man who had finally found something worth protecting, partnered with a woman who had decided it was worth fighting for. That combination, it turned out, was the most powerful thing in Black Hollow, Wyoming in 1872. Or anywhere. Or any year. Some things do not change with the calendar. A man who loves the right person becomes capable of the right things. And a woman who sees a person clearly, not who they're rumored to be, not who their worst moment made them, but who they actually are underneath all the weight of surviving, and chooses them anyway, with her eyes open and her hands steady, is not choosing vulnerability. She is choosing strength of the only kind that lasts. Years later, when people told the story of what happened in Black Hollow in the winter of 1872, they always ended the same way. They said Wyatt Callahan was never dangerous because he had a gun. They said he was dangerous because he had a reason. And they said the woman who gave him that reason was exactly as dangerous as he was in exactly the ways that counted, and that together they were the kind of force that does not announce itself and does not stop. They were right about all of it.